Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Bring yourselves to order, please. As you can probably hear, there is a risk of me conking out entirely, and if I do, I will ask the Vice Chairman to take over. But as it's a short meeting, you'll probably get the benefit of a shorter meeting because I won't be able to say very much. Right, there's no fire drill scheduled, so if the alarm goes off, it is a fire. Probably. And the Democratic Services Officer will find the way out and hopefully return to tell us what it is. There's no surprise to everyone that the Council is hopefully recording this meeting. Can ask whether anyone else is intending to record this meeting for their own purposes. That's not to stop anyone, but just as an information point, so we can assume not, then. Move on to apologies for absence.
Thank you, Chairman. We've received apologies from Councillors Mumford and Spooner.
Item 2, notification of substitute members. Councillor Perry for...
Councillor Perry for Councillor Spooner.
Councillor Gooch.
Thank you. Councillor Gooch for Councillor Mumford. Thank you, Chairman.
Anyone else? No. Visiting members. Councillor Newton, what item?
Thank you. I'd like to speak on land south of Avery Lane. Thank you.
Thank you. There are no items withdrawn from the agenda this evening. 5. Any business the Chairman regards as urgent, including the urgent update report as it relates to matters to be considered at this meeting. Is it agreed we take the urgent update report? Well, just in case, if there is, we're taking it. Good. Item 6. Disclosures by members and officers. Councillor Prendergast.
This is with reference to agenda item 10. My husband has previously rented office space through a trust in Headcorn, and I believe the applicant on this is an employee of that trust. I don't think it bears any relevance, but thank you.
Thank you for the transparency, but I don't think it's relevant. Item 7, disclosures of lobbying. We will take those with the individual applications. Item 8, to consider whether any items should be taken in private because of the possible disclosure of exempt information. I'm not aware of any this evening. So, is it agreed we take everything in public? Item 9, reference from the Policy and Resources Committee, Budget Monitoring, Development Control Appeals. Page 1. Is there an officer introduction to this? I don't believe there is. In that case, I will take any member wishing to speak on this item. That's an amazing degree of enthusiasm. So, in that case, I propose we simply note the reference. Item 10, which has been renumbered 19 or 11. Sorry, item 17, or 10. Land between Ringleside and Ringles Gate, Grigg Lane, Headcorn, Kent. I'll ask the officer to introduce the report.
Thank you, Mr Chairman. This is an application on land between Ringles and Ringles Gate in Grigg Lane, Headcorn. It's an application for the erection of a detached two-storey house with parking. Just going through in terms of the site plan and the location plan. Obviously, you have Grigg Lane down here. You've got something isn't working.
Sorry about that.
Right, we haven't, just to say to Marmons, we haven't got a projector at the back, and all we've got are those two screens that are working. So apologies for that, members. You'll have to divert your gaze and members of the public towards those two screens, because obviously this one and the back projector isn't working. So apologies for that. So we now have the correct plan in terms of where we have. The chairman's gone to 17.
Let's get on with it. Right?
So, are members happy that I go with item 17? Right. Okay, I'll start again. So, we have, in terms of Grigg Lane, this is Grigg Lane. Obviously, you had the application which was on the previous planning committee further down off to the left, further down Grigg Lane for the 55 units on the allocated site. In terms of, you've got Ringles Gate. This is believed to be in the side, effectively the garden of Ringles Gate. You've got Ringleside here and Ringles Cottage here, and you've got the Nursery Business Park, which are the larger buildings in the background that you'll see in the photographs. Just putting proposed house, parking area with access directly onto Grigg Lane. In terms of the application, so this is the front of the property, existing access. So the application site is just around here, and you can see the nursery buildings in the background. In terms of, this is just looking at the southern boundary, looking sideways, effectively. So this is the site here. And the house that you can see in the background there is the Ringles. And in terms of the plots, maybe I should just take you back to this one. These two properties are the cult bungalows referred to in the report. So in terms of, they are the bungalows which have got the agricultural ties to them. And that is in terms of where the essence of the report comes from, in terms of the difference in terms of the character and the impact that that has on the street scene as being a harmful impact. So back into the site, this is looking towards the Grigg Lane boundary. So this is the hedgerow with Grigg Lane just behind that. And then this is the neighbouring cult bungalow, which is the Ringleside. As I said, you've got two properties, and I think you've got Grigg Lane just off to the right-hand side. You've got two properties which, not similar in design, but form these cult bungalows on the agricultural ties. So what is being proposed is this building, which is a two-storey dwelling, front elevation, rear, flank elevations, and this is first ground floor and first floor plans, and those are the principles coming forward. So I'm not going to really go into too much detail on the application because the officer's report sets out the detail. I'm just pointing out a couple of issues in terms of the looking at the prop. On page 64, under Ringles Gate, you've got a recent application, well, 14 application, which sought the erection of a detached dwelling, and that was refused. They were refused on the grounds of the unsubstantiated need in terms of the agricultural need. That also proposed a two-storey dwelling, and in terms of the impact that was arising from that. There are a number of other planning histories, you'll see in terms of where the replacement on page 65, 021686, which sought to replace the 3 existing dwellings with 4 new houses on the site, and you've got the ground set out in the report. I'm not going to go into detail because I think that is set out in the report. I think the key issues to raise, and as set out on 629, is the officer has had negotiation with the applicant on this scheme. It is acknowledged, and as I pointed out in those photographs, that there are other 2-storey dwellings along Grigg Lane, and I've just drawn your attention to the recent resolution to approve on the 55 units on the allocated site just further to the west. I think in terms of where the key principal concern rests on this application site is not necessarily whether the principle of development is acceptable, because 6.29 sets out that the applicant was requested to amend the details to come up with a scheme and a design which was more in keeping with the 2 adjacent bungalows either side, so i.e. these 2 bungalows, and that was the principal area of concern that was raised by the officer. So we're not necessarily talking about principles. Whilst it's outside the settlement boundary, obviously SB 17 applies. You've got to look at the harm. I think officers are of the view that, you know, the principle could be established on that point. The key issue on here is the height, design and scale of this unit and how you read this infill dwelling against the other 2 cult bungalows either side. And I think that's where the key issue rests. The officer has come down on the view in terms of that this results in significant harm to the character of the street scene, and I'll probably leave it at there. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. I'll just ask the legal officer to introduce how the public speaking will work.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This is a short announcement for members of the public, and in particular those who are speaking on an item this evening. As you've just heard, the item is announced by the chairman, and then the planning officer introduces the item. The chairman will then call the speakers. When you hear your name called, please could you come forward to the table in front of you and take a seat. To speak, press the middle button. You do not need to hold it down. The button will turn green and the ring around the mouthpiece on the microphone will turn red. You will have 3 minutes to speak. You'll see your time counting down on the screen here. At the end of the 3 minutes, the chairman will remind you, or I will remind you, that your time is up. Once you've finished speaking, please press the middle button again. The microphone will turn white and then return to your seat. You may hear some of the speakers referred to as visiting members. They are members of the council, but they don't sit on this committee. They also have 3 minutes to speak, but they have no right to vote on any of these applications. Thank you.
Thank you. Our first speaker this evening is Councillor Dungay, Headcorn Parish Council.
Good evening, Chair, Committee. According to policy SP17, Maidstone is predominantly rural, with a large proportion of the population living in villages as well as on the fringes of the urban area. Our parish council is trying very hard to prevent Headcorn from becoming urban, but we still have fringes. This application concerns building on such a site, and previous permissions have been granted. However, the site is now considered to be outside the defined settlement area, and the officer is recommending refusal. Same area, different definition. He affirms that the design, scale and proportions of the new house would result in significant harm to the character and appearance of the street scene. The street scene includes a silo, prefabricated farm buildings, cottages, significant building at Kent Cottage and Chance Holding, Elizabeth House and its infill, doctor's surgery, etc. All examples of considerable variety and diversity. And the biggest anomaly of all, the persimmon development granted by you just last week, 55 new houses at Gibbs Hill Farm, just a little way along this same lane. Presumably, these new houses would not result in significant harm to the character and street scene, just the one new house at the Ringles. Dare we ask, where is the consistency? The Ringles application fulfills the social role of sustainable development in that the applicant employs more than 100 people, a boost for our local economy. We understand that Mr. Hodgson and family wish to occupy this larger house themselves. They have outgrown their current dwelling and need to upgrade. However, the Borough Council have previously considered that it has not been demonstrated that the dwelling of the size proposed is commensurate to the needs of a person employed in full-time agriculture. Is this discriminatory? Does this mean that agricultural persons must live in small dwellings? Certainly sounds like that. There have, as far as we are aware, been no objections from the neighbours. With regard to the proposed house being overly prominent and visually obtrusive, surely conditions regarding screening and planting should reduce any adverse impact, as is the case with other larger properties along the road. This country lane is full of anomalies. There is no regular theme. The Parish Council asks you to approve this application and allow an established local agricultural employer to build a home of his choice. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Hodgson, please.
Good evening, councillors. I am Douglas Hodgson, the applicant, and I'm asking you to approve my application. The principal objection covers the design and scale of the proposed home, character and appearance in the street scene, context of the site and local distinctiveness. I have read the officer's assessment and wish to address those concerns directly. The design and scale is similar to the 55 houses that were approved last week in Grigg Lane. It is not large, it is a 4-bedroom family home suitable for my family that will accommodate us all. It is against policy to promote the building of poor housing stock, and yet 3 poorly constructed nearby dwellings have been cited as examples that should be followed. The building design enhances the local area because of the high quality of design and the fact it will hide the commercial buildings from the road. 75 houses have already been built in Grigg Lane, along with a doctor's surgery. Permission has been granted to build another 55 houses within 200 metres of this proposed home. These developments have one theme in common. They were all built on green fields in Grigg Lane. The description of the street scene contains several omissions. There is no mention of the 2-storey house opposite, no mention of the 3-storey house next door, and a cursory mention of the commercial site behind. Directly behind this plot are commercial units. The existing bungalows that are mentioned are of poor design and construction and do not meet the needs of the current and future generations. The NPPF sets out you should support healthy communities and provide housing to meet the needs of the present and future generations. This location is sustainable. My dwelling is an infill, it is not in open countryside, and it is surrounded by other buildings, most of them considerably larger than this proposed home. It is on land that the council has previously granted permission to build on, and the proposed home retains the existing landscape features, native hedging and the oak trees. The materials to be used are identical to those approved in last week's application: wooden weatherboarding, clay tiles, tile hanging. There were no objections from the statutory authorities. The Parish Council wishes to see the application approved, and are here with me tonight supporting me. In conclusion, the planning history clearly shows prior planning permission for additional and replacement 2-storey dwellings at this location. There are no objections from the statutory authorities. The location is sustainable and there is a need. The dwelling is designed with local style in mind and uses traditional local materials common to this part of Kent. The dwelling will contribute to the windfall sites within the borough, and the dwelling will do no harm in an already built-up environment. In light of these arguments I've put forward, I ask that you consent to the planning permission for my proposed home. Thank you.
Thank you. I turn to the ward members. Which of you wishes to go first?
Thank you, Chair. And you know, I've just heard 2 very, very good presentations that cover many key factors in relation to this particular application. It does seem weird that we're building, several dozens of houses and a new doctor's surgery 50 metres from this building. So it definitely is a sustainable site with a doctor's surgery there and a chemist shop as well. And those houses are being built because they're 5 minutes walk from a railway station and 10 minutes from shops. So it is very much a sustainable location, and I get the argument about height, design and scale. But let me take this into context. If you actually look at your actual map of the site on page 63 of the original agenda, you will actually see that it is stuck between 3 Colt cedarwood houses. Right behind it, you see a little circle thing and a block of 2 buildings. That is the powerhouse. That is the boiler house for all the glass houses you see all the way behind you. This house will actually stop us seeing a 20-metre chimney in a large powerhouse that's, quite frankly, necessary. It does a pertinent job, but the house is going to look an awful lot better than this powerhouse that's stuck behind it. And, as Councillor Dungy says, a bit of landscaping and a few trees, a bit of hedgerow. I'm confident that it would actually enhance the street scene ultimately at the end of the day, rather than have any deteriorating effect. So, I'll close with that, but secondly, perhaps I should have declared an interest. I live in a cult house, just like the Vice Chair and Chair of the Planning Committee of Headcorn Parish Council. We both have, let's say, a precious respect for cult houses. But I'm fairly sure that if we get the design right in this, and it looks wholly acceptable to me, that the cult houses won't be offended by this new house.
Thank you, Councillor Round. Councillor Prendergast.
Thank you. I'm not sure that there's much I can add to what Councillor Dungy and the applicant and Councillor Round have already said. I know the area very well, and but just to sort of reconcile what I was reading here with what I know of the area, I thought I'd take a drive down there this afternoon. And really, I think what we're missing here is the context of the site. And I think Councillor Round has covered that really well. I don't know what we mean by local distinctiveness anymore, because that local distinctiveness has changed over the years that I've lived in Headcorn. It's a completely different landscape now. I don't think policy SB 17 really applies in this instance. It's not open countryside. It's an infill site with a great big agricultural buildings behind it. Really ugly agricultural buildings, actually. We've got those 55 houses approved. We've got the doctor's surgery. I think, Martin, I counted, I make it over 260 homes in the locality that we have built in the last few years, if you include the Lenham Road, Grigg Lane sites, because they all interlink. So that's a lot of development. And in my mind, this is an absolutely sustainable location, and really we should be looking for reasons to approve this rather than... And I find it quite interesting, that the agricultural occupancy thing is coming into effect, that it's too large to... I live in a farmhouse that was built in 1771, and it has more than 4 bedrooms. So obviously, if it was good enough for agricultural occupation in 1771, I don't see why we have a negative attitude towards something on the fringe of a village at this very time. So I'd be interested to hear what other members have to say, but I really think we should be looking for reasons to approve this rather than refuse this. I'll come back if I need to. Thanks.
Councillor Powell.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I must say I haven't actually been out to look at the site myself, but just listening to the to residents and indeed the parish council earlier on today, I think that was one of the most sort of compelling arguments that we've had to actually build. Some of the objections were things that we actually agreed last week with the other site, so it would suggest there was a bit of an inconsistency. The only thing that I can really think of is that the officer that's put this report together probably just had a bad day. And we all do that. Sorry, Chair. I know what you're going to say. I apologise for that, yeah. But I can't see an issue with it at all. I'm looking for reasons why we should be in a position to turn this down. And just based on what we heard last week and what we've got in front of us, what we've heard tonight, I just can't.
Councillor Harwood.
Thank you, Chairman. I do wonder whether colleagues are looking at the same plans that I've looked at and the site that I've looked at. For anybody who knows Chartway Street very well, and Councillor Mrs Stockwell will know it very well, there are some mock Georgian piles along Chartway Street amongst bungalows and so on, and they look so jarring and incongruous within that area that I think this will be appropriate on Grove Green. I'm not entirely sure it's appropriate in this location. And the point about the fact that there is other development in the area, two wrongs don't make a right. We know that housing allocations and so on is something very specific. There was a call for sites and the local plan demand for all this housing. We ended up with what we would. In a perfect world, we wouldn't have done it. We have policies to try and protect our street scene, the approaches to our villages and other areas for a very good reason. And the spacing between developments and trying to get some equilibrium between the existing and the new is a key purpose of the MPPF and indeed our local plan. I hear what the parish council say about the fact that it has hedgerows around the site and so on now, but who's to say that a few years down the line that they don't get moved out to create car parking to put SUVs on, which is what's happened in Chartway Street and elsewhere. So I'm not particularly kind of convinced by that argument. I think in relation to the site, it may be possible to get something onto that site. If it is smaller, it's more in scale, and it's more in scale with the village, maybe weatherboarding and so on. So it actually looks like a Wealden house, and it may be bigger, but I don't think this design and approach and the way it fills the plot is at all appropriate in planning terms, and I think that's why officers have come down with the recommendation they have. So, to preserve policy compliance, I would like to move that we refuse the application as per the papers. Thank you.
Councillor Clark, you seconded that. Do you want to speak now?
I'll reserve my right, Chairman.
Councillor Gooch is next then, and then...
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you to Headcorn Parish Council. You certainly put a very good reasons forward, because I looked at this and I just wanted to hear what your view was, and certainly the applicant. So thank you for being very succinct and clear. But when looking at this, I know that other stuff has gone on nearby, but the point for me is that we have to treat each application on its own merits. I hear that it's certainly sustainable. I was interested to hear what my colleagues over there said about the sustainability. And the arguments in favour appear to be sound, but there's something about the immediacy of just this particular site, this agricultural, commercial, if you like, site. And I just feel that the overall size of the house, to me, it would dwarf the rest of the commerciality going round it, or the agricultural buildings there. It really is very, very big, and you'd have to have quite a few, I was going to say poplars, chestnuts, whatever, to hide it. And I really am a bit concerned about the size of the house. I'm certainly not against any development. I think the arguments for having a dwelling of some kind on this site, haven't got any problem with that at all, but I am concerned about the overall size. It's pretty big, and the design. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. I'll bring Mr Bailey back now.
Thank you, Mr Chairman. Just to clarify a couple of points. I'd like to go back to what the applicant said in terms of the previous approval in 2004. To be very clear, that approval was for a chalet style with rooms in the roof. So those two dwellings on that plot effectively, one that was here and one was here, was a chalet style. I've got the drawings in front of me, so in terms of how they blended, in terms of the context of the cult bungalows, I'm just putting that in context because the applicant did say they were two-storey. Technically, they've got 2 floors on them, but what we categorise as a chalet style with rooms in the roof. First point. In terms of the issues of agricultural buildings, let's be clear, this application is not proposing this for an agricultural dwelling. There's no agricultural tie that's been put forward. There's none of those issues being put forward on this building. It's a straight house in the countryside, so I just think that needs to be clear. And obviously, the council is generally, in policies, are supportive of agricultural dwellings where there is a need and there's a financial and functional relationship to the agricultural holding. And that's where we have to look at in terms of, if you came up with a very large building, can the financial and functional needs support the agricultural holding? So that's just put in the context, but that's irrelevant to this site because this is not being proposed for an agricultural dwelling. It's a dwelling, a normal dwelling in the countryside. In terms of, I think those are the points I really wanted to clarify, members. And as I said, I go back to what the officers say in 6.29. I did say that in my presentation. I think a principle of the right dwelling, and as the officer clearly says in 6.29, that the applicant was asked to come up, and we were trying to mediate and negotiate a reduced scheme which had a reduced impact. So that draws the conclusions that we weren't saying technically that it caused substantial harm in terms of the countryside, because I think that paragraph acknowledges that were you to get the right design of dwelling in that context, then it should be acceptable. So I think this is about the issue of the height, scale and massing and how it relates to the context of the street scene, not necessarily about the SP17 policy and the conflict with that, because I think that paragraph sets out clearly where the officer view was set.
I'm sorry, members are going to have to give me a minute to go and refill my water glass and do take some pills. It'll be 2 minutes of charm.
Sorry, members, I know the chairs. This is just to put a Google street scene context. It is not.
Yeah, thank you. I apologise about that.
Sorry.
Right, I apologise for that. Right, we had now got to... Do you have any further clarifications you need to bring to bear?
Sorry, Chair. All I put on is just to give members and appreciate the fact that this is a Google. So, as I said, all the things that we put up, this is a street view issue. It's not something controlled by the council. It's just to give some, in terms of context for the site, in terms of just so you can see those two, because obviously I appreciate the photographs didn't show those two bungalows in the context of the street. So what I'm aiming to try to do is just to show to members what those two bungalows are and the infill garden. So in terms of where that is, appreciate the fact that there has been concern raised that these aren't up to date. I'm just trying to help members inform their decision in terms of the context of the street.
Wonders of modern technology.
So obviously you'll see that this is the cult bungalow here, and moving across here into the site, that's the other bungalow, cult bungalow, and the application site is over here, and then moving forward you've got the other cult bungalow here. So it's just literally, I'll take the photograph off, it just gives you some context.
Just coming back to some of the comments that have been made by members here. Councillor Gooch, you mentioned about the height and the scale of the buildings. When I went up there today, I did have a good look, and right across the road from the entrance to the plot is a two-storey building, right across the road. So yes, you do have cult bungalows on either side. Coming back about 100 yards on the opposite side of the road, there is a housing association, a West Kent building that has been built recently. That's 2.5, 3 stories. It's quite imposing, followed by the doctor's surgery. So it is fairly built up, and these buildings are not sitting in isolation anymore. Mr. Bailey, I'll just come back to hedges and SUVs. I'm not sure that we should be predicting what's happening in the future. We should really be looking at the application as it is, and it is screened. There is an existing hedge there. We can't account for what happens to hedges. We had one in Headcorn on the Sutton Road recently, where we actually put in a condition saying we didn't want the hedgerow removed to protect a listed building. Well, I can tell you that entire hedgerow is missing. Yes, I know. No, I'm saying, I'm coming back to what members were saying. Mr. Bailey, I'm not very fond of anecdotes, but you spoke about the height, the scale, and the massing. Well, I am aware that not so long ago, the owner of that particular nursery was approached by our officers here asking if we wanted to if he would be interested in putting 200 houses on that site. Now, those would be two-storey buildings, perhaps the odd 2.5, 3-storey building. So we could be sitting here looking at something that could be significantly different when we're talking about height, scale, and massing. Here we are talking about one house which is going to be in local material, in style is going to fit in with what we have already approved, and there seems to be a resistance that I just cannot understand. I don't feel that SP 17 applies. Policy DM30, it's unobtrusively located and well screened. I think we should. I've said enough today. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Obviously, I draw a bit of a comparison with a decision we made at the back end of last week's meeting down in Linton, albeit that was for 13 dwellings in the conservation area, and this committee decided to deviate from its local plan and put that through. And I do think that with these sites that do come up that aren't in the plan, we have to be very, very mindful that we are putting an extra burden on our infrastructure, particularly in the countryside, when these come forward. Having said that, I think this is where this differs from the particular site last week, is that there is clearly There are residential properties next door. This is on the outskirts of Headcorn. We can argue whether it's sort of in the countryside technically or part of the village. The reality is there are far less sustainable sites in the area that we look at. My issue here with this is that obviously we saw on the Google image that you've got the 3 bungalows there already. Now, I was last driving up here a couple of weeks ago, and the 3 bungalows are still there. There might have been additional developments on the other side of the road, but those 3 bungalows are already there. And what we need to do is ensure the design for this complements those dwellings particularly well. There may have been different sorts of blocks put on the other side of the road, but ultimately, as we see on page 63 of the original agenda, the most important thing for me is to make sure that the design is as close as possible to those 3 dwellings. And I don't feel it is as a 2-storey house. I agree with Mr Bailey that actually I wouldn't have any objection to this at all if it came with rooms in the roof. But being 2-storey, it does look out of keeping with those particular bungalows. And as a consequence, I'm finding it quite hard, if I'm honest, to provide suitable evidence to overturn the officer's recommendation in this case. So I remain open-minded about this, as members can come up with any other reasons. But at the moment, I am erring on the side towards agreeing with the officer, because, as has been pointed out, he or she did try and help the applicant. They did look to ask the applicant to put in amended plans. This was pointed out, as we've got in the report in front of us, and amended plans didn't come forward. So we do have to judge what we've got already, and I just feel that if you were to look at this dwelling, if it were up as proposed with those other 3 dwellings as well, this would look slightly out of place.
Have a private conversation between the 2 of you. Now, Councillor Perry.
Thank you, Chairman. The only issue, when I read this, I really struggled to find a reason to refuse, actually. I really did struggle. The only issue I could actually think of, well, it's not in the local plan, but as Councillor Bolton said, it's not necessarily a criteria if it's a good proposal. I just think we're making an awful meal of this, and I'm sorry to say it. It's a very sustainable site. We know that. It's already been described. It's very sustainable. Now, I live in a rural area, and I live in a very old house, a 300-year-old house, but I'm surrounded. Up the road, there's a bungalow. Up another road, there's a Victorian house. Up the corner, there's a 15th century house. And up the road, there's another different design house. That's what you get in a rural area. You get a mix. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's what you choose to do. So I think it's an awful meal and a lack of understanding of this whole street scene. I don't buy it. And as someone who lives in a rural area, I do know a little bit what I'm talking about on this. I also find it absolutely incredible that we can approve 55 houses down the road, and yet we're struggling over what is a 4-bedroom family house. And I actually rather like the idea of a 4-bedroom family house. There's nothing wrong with that. I think it's helping to provide accommodation which is needed, and I see absolutely no problem with that at all, and I think it's very commendable. I can't really see a single issue here that I would want to find as a reason to refuse. I really don't. I think the 2 presentations made were absolutely excellent, and actually I agree with them 100%. Particularly the parish council's view. And I also think that we should take parish council's views very seriously. They're the people on the ground, they're the people who live in the area, and their views should be respected. Now, I'm not saying we all have to agree, but nevertheless, they put a very powerful argument. So, the final point I would make, there seems to be a lack of consistency. I think last week an application was approved, and I think this was mentioned by Councillor Bolton, and we need to be a little bit more consistent. And I really struggle that if we've approved an application for 55 houses down the road, how this can be damaging to the rural environment, because quite frankly it can't be. It's as simple as that. And I would like to move straight away to approve this application. Thank you.
I'm afraid you're going to have to actually give something more of a reason than you just don't agree with the recommendation for an overturn. You have to give an actual positive reason. I do believe we are making too much of this. It's a very simple question. Is the building too big for the site it's on? Simple as that. Yes or no? Because that's essentially what it's all about. Every other issue is acceptable. It's a question of the scale of this building as against its neighbours and whether it's acceptable or not. That's all it's about. So unless anyone has something new to add. Councillor Mortimer.
Yeah. Obviously, there are exceptions to policy, and one would be that this should be for an agricultural worker, but it's not. And I totally agree with Councillor Harwood that this is too big in that area. Officers have made it very clear that there would be a very, very good chance of a 1.5 storey, like a chalet-type bungalow. And if that was going to be the case, I would have no reasons to refuse it. But this, I'm sorry, with the 2 cult bungalows each side, it just doesn't fit in. So I'm afraid I am going along, after listening to everybody's speech, I'm going along with the refusal on the ground shown on the paper. Thank you.
Councillor Clark, you reserved your right.
Thank you, Chairman. In some ways, I think about appeal decisions that we've looked at leading up to the point at which we got a 5-year land supply. And in actual fact, the government inspectors and the government would actually say that a 55-house development is actually brings more benefit than a single-house development. And whether we like that or not, reading appeal decisions, that clearly seems to be the mood of the government. Now, the fact that we've got 55 houses further down the road, it's in the local plan. If we have one across the road that was 40, somebody could say, well, why can't we have the 40 houses? There's already going to be 55 across the road. Well, the distinction is that for whatever reason, that was accepted to be suitable for the local plan, and it's in the local plan. And that does make a big difference. Now, I personally do take on board, in actual fact, the example, Chartway Street, is a very good example. This is a single house at the moment, but let's say we go ahead with this size house and this scale. The field further up, you'll see another house, then another house, then another house, and you'll have your 55 houses, because every one of them will say, why can't my house go forward? That one just down the road got it, and I do feel that this isn't quite the right development for this site. I'm not saying that there isn't a design that would work here, but I just feel that we go against our officer's recommendation at our peril on this one, because I feel that we'd be opening up a can of worms.
It is open to members to move an amendment to overturn, but clear, cogent reasons must be given, especially since the court case in Dover earlier this week. Yes. Right. Okay. Fine. I just had to give Mr. Perry the chance to move something if he wished to. But we don't appear to have anything on the table, so...
Yeah. Well, my view is that it's a sustainable development. So what is the issue we're talking about?
The issue is essentially what members who wish to approve this have to say about the street scene, the context, the scale and the relationship of the development to its neighbours. That's the issue. That's the ground that's been given for refusal.
For refusal, so you've got to go...
To overcome it, you have to address that. Clearly, no one is at this moment, so I will move to the vote.
Well, all I say is it doesn't have an adverse effect on the street scene. As someone who's in a rural area, I know what I'm talking about. Thank you.
Sorry. Motion, because that's just an assertion.
Someone has said it has an adverse effect. That's an officer's view. I disagree with that view.
Yeah, for
fair
what
enough,
reason?
I'm entitled to.
For what reason? Okay. It's been moved. We proceed to the vote on the main motion. We do not have an amendment that is actually properly phrased, so I will move to the vote on the main motion. That consent be granted as per the recommendation on the papers. Sorry, I mean refused. I'm getting confused myself now. That consent be refused as set out in the recommendation on the papers. All those in favour of that recommendation? Those against? Abstentions? That recommendation is agreed then. Yes, the recommendation is agreed, and that recommendation was to refuse. I'm sorry if I sounded imperious there, but you do have to give reasons for overturns. Now move to land south of Avery Lane and land south of Sutton Road. Item 19 or 11, depending which agenda page you're using. What? Yes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I wasn't proposing to do a presentation on this item because it was presented to members on the 16th of November and was deferred. The report sets out the key issues. Obviously, you now have the Highways Officer here, so members can ask any questions from the Highways Officer. But just very briefly, obviously, if you're aware, it was about their existing site on the Sutton Road in B, annotated here, and the proposed site on Avery Lane, which is proposed in this location here. So that would be demolished and a new building would be erected here. Obviously, there were concerns expressed because KCC Highways had requested, as set out on page 103, paragraph 103, a condition which would restrict...
Can you open the door, Martin? Thank you.
A condition that would restrict larger vehicles accessing the site, and members obviously requested alternative solutions be sought to achieve this. So I'll let KCC Highways, who have here and made the effort to come tonight, to address members' concerns on that particular point. So I'm not going to go into too much detail on that. But I will just focus on, obviously, there have been discussions with the applicants, and they're set out on your report, as set out on paragraphs 204. But obviously members did request some further, as set out of paragraphs 301, some further landscaping to address the car parking area. So this has been an opportunity to present the new landscaping plan on the eastern and southern side here to bolster that landscaping proposal here. So what I wasn't proposing to do is to go in any further detail, and members may want to let KCC address their particular issues at this point. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. But obviously, as per the recommendation, is as per the papers.
Mr. Primordialski.
Right, good evening, Chairman and members. I don't intend to repeat everything which was presented to you at the November meeting, but I do wish to draw to your attention that this proposal is essential to enable Runborough nurseries to continue to trade, maintain jobs and contribute to Maidstone's rural economy. It's important to reiterate that the trees and plants produced on the nearby growing fields will be transported to the building for storage, grading and packing by small tractors and trailers. The finished trees and plants will be transported to the customer by vans and light goods vehicles only. No large goods vehicles or articulated vehicles will operate into or out of the site. The land is currently used for horticultural production, which generates farm vehicle movements. This will not change, and it's important for members to note that vehicle movements associated with this proposal are not new. They already occur on the highway network. Vehicle movements, whether it be by tractor and trailer or other large agricultural machinery, are part of agriculture and the horticultural industry and have been for the past 100 years. This will continue all the time food and other produce is produced on the land. The access to the site from Avery Lane is the only means of access to the land. The applicant does not own and has no access right over third-party land to the south to the A24 Sutton Road. The Parish Council and I think the local ward member appear to be maintaining objections to the proposal on highway safety grounds, but this proposal will not result in a significant increase in vehicle movements, nor will it cause a danger to the safe and free flow of traffic on Avery Lane or other local roads. Turning to the issue of landscaping, as Mr Bailey has already said, we have submitted a revised landscaping scheme to provide additional tree and hedge planting to the southern and eastern boundaries of the site to screen the development. And I can confirm that all of the existing boundary trees and hedgerows will be retained. I hope members will support this proposal and the contribution it will make to Maidstone's rural economy. Thank you very much.
Councillor Newton, please.
Thank you. As already explained, Avery Lane is a very narrow and single track road, unlit, poorly maintained and potholed. Very deeply potholed, I might add, on the junction where this is proposed to come out, 18 inches deep this morning, or this afternoon actually. There are several dangerous bends. It is widely used by walkers, gangs of farm labourers, cyclists and farm vehicles. The Parish Council strongly believe that the proposed increase in traffic resulting from the new pack house, which we support, which the Parish Council are happy to support, it's the access in and out of this site. Now, on your papers, you'll see that the officer said KCC raised no objections. That's not true, because there are 9 objections that are in the letter that KCC I've managed to get a copy of, all totally ignored. I trust members have been down Avery Lane and seen it in the last few days, covered with mud, trenches on either side of the road. These tractors are not small. They're about 2.25 metres wide. Now, that's about the width of the road. Now, if you come across one of those tractors, you've got a big problem. This is going to seriously damage the amenities. It will cause harm in the local area to the greenfield sites. Now, bear in mind, what they need to look at is an alternative way of getting out onto the Sutton Road. There are roads coming out of Rumwoods onto the Sutton Road, so I don't think that's probably a major problem, but that's what we need to look at. But I'm very concerned that the KCC letter objecting to this was not fully dealt with in this report, in the first report. If there is another alternative exit and entry onto this site, then we would have no objections to it, but it does not need to be in Avery Lane. The damage to the environment, the damage to people's amenities is seriously threatened with this, and I would ask members to actually refuse this application on papers, to have it resubmitted and look at another way of getting on and getting off to this large pack house, which will undoubtedly benefit the economy of Maidstone. We're not against that. It's just this country lane will be in a terrible mess. If you haven't been there, well...
Councillor Newton, can you draw to a close, please?
That's it. I've done. Thank you. Just ask you to refuse it.
Can I take declarations of lobbying, please? Councillor Borton, Round, myself, Councillor Prendergast, Powell and Clark. Anyone? No, that's it. Right, over to you, Mr. Wright. There's a lot that's been said about highways.
Thank you, Chairman. I think it's firstly important to point out that the Highway Authority has not objected to this planning application. What we have had to do, however, is consider the adequacy of the access arrangement and the impact that the development would have on the local highway network. Now, what's important in this instance is that the applicant has confirmed that it would only be cars, vans, light goods vehicles, tractors and trailers that would require access to and from the site, and that there wouldn't be a need for larger vehicles to access the site. Perhaps the other important point is that the site would utilise an existing access which in its own right could attract a certain number of traffic movements. Now, weighing up the application, we, as Highway Authority, we suggested a condition which was really intended to be a safeguard. So that condition would restrict the site from generating traffic movements by large vehicles. And in doing so, that would provide a mechanism so that if either authority received complaints about large vehicles accessing the site, there would be a mechanism in place to take action and deal with that. The discussions that we've had with the case officer have explored whether there may be alternatives to that condition. Really, the only logical alternative would be a traffic regulation order that would prohibit or restrict vehicles of that nature from using Avery Lane. There are a number of drawbacks with that approach. Firstly, it's disproportionate in relation to the impact of the development, because we are, after all, talking about a small number of traffic movements. It would also disadvantage existing residents, businesses and road users, because, after all, there are instances where larger vehicles may need to use Avery Lane, and they legitimately do so at the moment. And typically, with traffic regulation orders, you would have an exemption in place for vehicles requiring access to premises on that road. So we don't feel like that's an appropriate way forward. We would continue to regard the condition that we've suggested as appropriate, but either way, we don't have any fundamental grounds on which to object to the planning application. Thank you.
Councillor Harwood.
Thank you, Chairman. I totally take on board the comments from the Parish Council and the Ward Councillor. However, I think it's all been said that in planning terms, I think the only concern was in relation to harm to the landscape and the countryside. I think we've overcome that with the bolstered landscaping scheme that we've achieved since the last meeting. And in terms of highways, there is nothing we can object to. So, though we might all well understand the issues at stake here, actually, that there is not any planning reason why we can change or refuse the application that is before us. It's not the application perhaps we would like with a different access, is this application, and the means of access is part of it, and there isn't a grounds for refusal. So that said, I will move that we grant permission as per the papers with the amended landscaping scheme and the other tweaks that we've had since the last time this application was discussed. Thank you.
Is that seconded? Councillor Round, do you wish to speak now?
I will. I think, that, as Councillor Harwood has said, we've heard it, and we've actually had a considerable supporting substantiation from the officer from the county, and I think the explanation from the county has really helped clarify the position.
Thank you, Councillor Powell.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Sorry, just contrary to our last speaker, there was a letter that was held up this evening by Councillor Newton suggesting that there was 9 objections. Can I just ask the gentleman from KCC as to why we didn't actually see a copy of what those objections may have been? I'm not suggesting for 1 minute it's going to change the overall thing, but I think it would have been only fair for us to base a judgment on something that is as sensitive as that. It must have been actually issued for a reason. I'd like to obviously know what that reason was, given there was 9 objections. And also, when looking at the alternatives, did any discussions actually happen with the parish council or any local residents, assuming there is any local residents around Avery Lane? Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. The letter that Councillor Newton is referring to was the County Council's consultation comments on the planning application as Highway Authority. There is a list of 9 points within that, but they are 9 suggested conditions that would be attached to any planning consent. The fundamental position was no objection, but we were suggesting this additional condition to restrict larger vehicles from accessing the site, just to be clear on that. In terms of the dialogue, the dialogue was between ourselves and the case officer on the application.
Thank you very much. Is that clear now, Councillor Powell?
Yeah, I just think that certainly in cases like this, it's sometimes good to actually speak to kind of the local people, the parish council, just to get an overall position before it comes to this committee. That's just a personal thought, Chair.
I'm sure you're right. Councillor Mortimer.
Thank you, Chair. Okay, highways again. I do apologise coming back to highways, but you said you'd like a condition to stop larger vehicles, I presume HGVs, accessing the site. That's as I understand it. So there's nothing stopping, and no, we can't do this, so there'd be nothing stopping HGVs going up New Road, along Avery Road, parking outside and being unloaded in the road. That can happen. We can't enforce traffic going up there. So that condition, to me, is not worth, with respect, it's not worth the paper it's written on, because if they're up that far and we can't stop them, they might just well go inside the unit. But what I'm looking at is, obviously, parish are happy, everybody's happy, but it is the access. And I'm sorry, Chairman, this is my first meeting. I wasn't here when you discussed this before, but I would like to see that if Councillor Gordon and the parish are saying there is a problem, has it been gone back to the applicant to say, can an alternative entrance that goes straight down to the A274, has that been looked at? I mean, I'm getting a nod now, that's good, because if you said no, then I would ask for a deferment again to go back and look at that, because it is just the highways, again, that I'm stuck with on this one. But, you know, perhaps you can explain how that condition will make any difference to me, please, about stopping going in the site. Thank you.
I can probably address that, and I think Mr. Brzezinski already did that at the start, because they don't own that. They don't own the land, so there's no way there could be an access that could go down to the A2s and 4 because they don't own the land. So I think Mr. Brzezinski in his presentation did actually say that, and it's quite clear that was looked at and suggested at the last meeting, and it's clear that, and both times from my recollection at the last meeting, it was also inferred that they obviously didn't own the land, so they couldn't gain access to that point.
Thank you, that's very helpful.
Chairman, I'd still like an answer from Highways whether he really believes that an extra condition to stop the lorries going into that site will make any difference at all, please.
Well, our view is that, bearing in mind that Avery Lane is a narrow road and isn't necessarily suitable for large numbers of large vehicles, it's better to, if that situation were to arise and those vehicles were accessing that site, it's better to have a mechanism that would then enable you to take appropriate action against the applicant. So that's where we're coming from. As I said, it's a safeguard should that situation arise. Hopefully it wouldn't, but it would be in place if it did.
Chair, I do need just to come back. You keep saying accessing the site. The condition would be they don't access the site. So my question was, what happens when they drive up that road and stop in the country lane and it's dealt with from there? That's the point I'm talking about. Not going in the site. We can condition that, but I'm talking about the country lane respect. I beg your pardon.
I think we're on the same page here, actually. I was referring to Avery Lane, so it's vehicles using Avery Lane. That's specifically what I'm referring to.
Restrict that to stopping HGVs going down there, down Avery Lane.
As far as I can see, we could stop them going onto the site, but we couldn't stop them parking on the road, even with a TRO, because there'd be an exemption for access.
Exactly, Chairman. That's exactly my point. So what is the point of having this condition to say they can't accept the site, but they can go along the lane? It makes no sense. It's the lanes we're talking about.
It's not proposed. It's not proposed. KCC proposed it, but it's not on the papers. For that reason. OK. Councillor Cox gets the last word.
Feeling a bit like Steve Mumford. I would like... Yeah, I've got my flag. No, I know. Well, I was... Anyway. I'd just like to ask Mr Wright. He mentioned that no large vehicles should gain access. Now, we've heard from Councillor Newton that some of these tractors that are being counted aren't your little Massey Ferguson with a lovely funny face on the front. That they're quite large, and I would like Mr Wright to actually specify, because I think to just put, you can't come in if you're large, is a bit, well, I've got, I think we need to quantify what large is. Are we talking width? Are we talking height? Or are we talking weight? Because to just put large, I'd like to know what he meant by large. Not that I'm proposing anything. I want to know what Mr Wright meant by large.
We were essentially talking about heavy commercial vehicles, so they would be defined as having an operating weight exceeding 7.5 tonnes, ordinarily.
Right. Yes. Well, I mean, anyone that knows Avery Lane, I hope people have gone and looked at it. It is a very narrow lane, a single track almost, and, quite dangerous. But this move from Sutton Road to Avery Lane is going to cause quite a lot of trouble, I think. But both the parish councils are against it, Otham and Langley, and I think they make very good reasons as why. But, it seems as if it's going to go through. I will be voting against it. I think it is a bad move from them, but I don't know what we can do from the highways point of view to Avery Lane to make it better. It won't take HGVs. We can put a highways ban on HGVs on the lane, I suppose, but they would never be able to turn around, even a small 7.5 tonne. But
The Highway Department haven't objected, and it's essentially about highways issues. So that's where we are, as always. So the recommendation for approval as amended, with the landscaping has been moved and seconded. All those in favour, please indicate. Those against. Abstentions. That recommendation is agreed. We now move to appeal decisions, item 12.
I wasn't proposing to address any appeal decisions, just to note them, members, and if members have got any questions on those, I'll leave it at that, Mr. Chairman.
Item 13, public realm improvements, East Station.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Again, I'll be very brief on this one. I think this was raised by Councillor Harwood at Planning Committee about Maidstone East, and did request that I investigate the Section 106 list on the back of the report that you get on a quarterly basis to see whether there are any Section 106 contributions that at that time could have assisted with the shortfall of payment in terms of Network Rail we're having with the funding of the Maidstone East. Now, my understanding since that time as an update to the report is that shortfall has been made up, but notwithstanding that, I think what this is about really is about getting some public realm improvements, because notwithstanding any of these issues coming forward, Network Rail will only do what they intend to do, and that's not going to add benefit and public realm improvements to the scheme. And I think, you did ask me to go through that list. We identified 80-odd thousand pounds which could be used because there weren't any restrictions imposed on the 106. There weren't any time limits imposed, so we trawled through that whole list. There is now an opportunity, and you'll see the recommendation, that that money could be used, and my view would be that that would be used for enhancement for the niceties on that public realm, which Network Rail might not be providing. And I think this is a really good opportunity that with group spokespersons and on the back of that, that they can get involved in that process so they can see where that £80,000 is going to be used for some public enhancement, because Maidstone East is key, not only in terms of the approach, in terms of Maidstone as a destination when people come on the railway line, and also towards the future development of the site, the council-owned site with KCC on the next door site. So I think it's key. It's a really good project and a good opportunity for members to get involved in that particular area. Thank you.
Harwood.
Thank you, Chairman. As pointed out, when the Victoria Public House is demolished, which will be in about a month's time, it will this time. The pigeons aren't nesting in January, and they can take it down. And the new ticket office is created, creating that new public realm space where the Victoria Public House was in front of Sessions House. I think it really will shape the context of arriving in Maidstone, and it's really important. In terms of this additional money, members will see that on page 181, where there's a kind of mock-up sketch of the open space, there's actually a proposal that some really high-quality public art as a statue is actually put in. And what we don't want is there to be a plinth with nothing on it when it's built. So if we can move this Section 106 money into this site, it will help with the quality of that public realm, and hopefully it will deliver that commission, that statue or whatever, and we can actually create a really fine gateway to the borough rather than a derelict and dilapidated ruin. Thank you.
I fully support what Councillor Harwood has said. This is something that came out of the group spokesperson's trawl through the back pages of Section 106s from many years ago. It's a good use of the money. It's a site we can certainly do a great deal to make a friendlier face for Maidstone when you arrive. And it's in line with many of our policies and aspirations. So I was... Did you move the recommendation, Tony?
Yes, please. Yes, I did.
I will second it that. Councillor Prendergast, you indicated to speak.
Just curiosity. I'm not saying that I have any view either for or against, but if it's not ring-fenced and it's not time-limited, why are we preempting anything that Network Rail might be putting forward? What is the rush? Why are we rushing this? I'm just curious to know.
I think just to explain that, Network Rail will just deliver what they wish to deliver. So it might be, and in my view, in terms of the initial plans, because we've got some pre-applications on it, it will be quite a hard-edge, high-quality scheme, but there won't be the softening approach and the niceties that Councillor Harwood has already raised in terms of whether that be a statue, whether that be some more formal planting areas. What they will do is just deliver what their budget seeks to deliver. This, dare I call it, this is the icing on the cake, which will allow members the opportunity to put their input. We're not talking about insignificant sums of money here, because it is a public space, it is a strategic policy in terms of our borough, in terms of improving the appearance of the district, and I think this is an opportunity for members to shape that. The money was collected for open space purposes. This is a new open space area at a gateway site, and I think it's a very good use of that site. So I think there is the opportunity now. Without this money, then NBC doesn't have that influence. With this money, you, the spokespersons and the chair and vice chair, can influence how they want to see that particular site develop. And it means engagement with Network Rail. And I've had a chat with the regeneration manager, and he's already looking at organising meetings with those key partners, with those relevant groups, and we'll take that forward if members approve this tonight. So I think, personally, it's a real positive and meets our strategic objectives.
Thank you.
Just a quickie. I just feel like I've got to make a decision on the icing on a cake that I haven't tasted. That's it. You know, I don't know what we're doing here.
We will not be making a final decision on any designs of anything. Councillor Bolton, Councillor Round will be involved in this discussion going forward. So if you have any particular views, any member has any particular views on what icing should look or taste like, there will be discussions ongoing. So all I would say is this is an enabling resolution, not a commitment to spend on a particular project design here and now. I hope that clarifies matters. I'm now going to the vote on the recommendation as proposed and seconded. Those in favour, please. I don't have any chair's announcements, but there is a vice chairman's announcement.
The reason why there's a vice chair's announcement is it would have been a chair's announcement, but I decided it was probably more appropriate for me to take the conversation forward because there's necessary use of throat, and I wanted to curtail the chair's use of it. The reason why I wanted to make this mention this, some may or may not know, but for the interests of both this planning committee and the SPST, both Chair and I spent some time at Medway Council this week, together with Mr Jarman and Mr Bailey. We spent, and for those that are on SPST, you will also know that at the previous meeting, the subject of pre-planning applications came up. And we used that opportunity to discuss those at length with the Medway Council representatives, that was both the Chief Planning Officer and their Chair of Committee. And they have been running PPAs very successfully for some years. So since SPST passed that resolution last month, we examined that at far greater detail, and we actually covered a good many other subjects too, particularly subjects that have been raised both at this committee and indeed at SPST and indeed at spokespersons' meetings. So I won't detail all those conversations and all those points that we made, but these will certainly be coming up at spokespersons' meetings and future meetings. Nonetheless, informally, I'll be prepared to discuss them. But we covered so many subjects. It was a very informal day. And unless Mr. Bailey wishes to add more, I'll leave it there.
Very quickly, if I'm given the opportunity, I'll always address it. I'll just try to link in with that, really, because obviously you're all aware we're going for a transformation review implementation project in planning. A lot of work's gone on to that, and obviously in terms of our transformation consultant, some of you have met her, Mandy Samurai. One of her tasks is, moving forward into the new year, is to look at the implementation of PPAs and how we're going to develop the product and market that issue going forward. So I just think it links in quite neatly in terms of the discussions we've had, in terms of since the resolution of SPS&T, how we can look at developing that product so it becomes a key product moving forward. So, you know, our transformation consultant that's her task for the new year, and obviously with the new major projects team as well, and obviously with the appointment of the new major projects officer since Tim Chapman left us, I think, you know, it's a positive move going forward, and a positive issue of how we engage with the development industry and how we engage with our stakeholders. So I think overall it's a very good point.
Thank you. There are quite a few other ideas, not just on that subject, so which we will be discussing at a better time. I now declare the meeting closed. And a Merry Christmas. I may not make it, so I say it in advance.